So if you go to something like Romans chapter 5, Paul talks about, and I'm just going to use regular secular terminology, Adam messes everything up and the Christ comes and fixes it. So because of Adam, sin enters the world and death enters the world. And because of the fidelity of Jesus, then death is conquered and sin is conquered, and people are now back in a right relationship with God when they had been in this fractured relationship. Technical term for that is justification. So think about justified margins. Everything's now back in a right relationship. So what Adam broke, Jesus fixed. And that makes perfectly good sense. And then the text will go on so that by the time you get up to the so-called pastoral epistles, First Timothy comes in and glosses this and said, you know what? Adam was created first and then Eve. And Adam did not sin, but Eve sinned. The woman sinned and became a transgressor. So First Timothy says, you know what, it really wasn't Adam's fault, right? As if in the background, the author is thinking, oh, when Eve ate that fruit, because she ate first, and Genesis says she ate and she gave to the man who was with her and he ate, that he realized as soon as she took that bite, oh, there goes immortality. There goes my complete relationship with the divine. And Adam, because he's such a guy, eats the fruit in solidarity with her, knowingly giving up incorruption, knowingly giving up immortality. Oh, really? Right? If you read Genesis, you're not going to get that. But if you read it with that particular interest, you say, I can see where he gets it. So you wind up with original sin, which doesn't really get developed until Ambrose and then following him, St. Augustine, who formalizes the idea. Augustine comes up with this idea that when Adam ate the fruit, a change was wrought in his physical body, such that, to do a literal translation, his seed became vitiated. In other words, his DNA got compromised, his sperm got screwed up. And therefore, everybody inherits this taint of original sin because everybody is conceived with the semen that carries this marker, unless you're in the Roman Catholic tradition, in which case you have the Immaculate Conception, which means that when Mary was conceived, her father's sperm was straightened out. It sounds better if you do it in Latin. So and it makes sense. It's a logical reading. And original sin actually makes sense to me because it seems to me that human beings are hardwired towards selfishness. We're hardwired toward not necessarily loving our neighbor as we would love ourselves. We're certainly not very good at loving the stranger, let alone, as Jesus would put it, loving the enemy. And there are a lot of things we do that strike me as not quite in line with what the divine would have intended. So the idea of original sin makes a great deal of sense. But the Jewish tradition does not go there. When we read Genesis 3, which is the so-called fall narrative, the word fall is not used. The word sin is not used because sin doesn't enter the vocabulary of the Bible until Cain and Abel in the next chapter. So what happens with the Jewish tradition is instead of getting this original sin where there's an irreparable breach between God and humanity that only Jesus can fix, we note that when Adam and Eve leave Eden, God goes with them, and God is always with the people, and there's no irreparable breach. And then the Jewish tradition then has various ways of understanding how what happened with Adam and Eve impacts us.
So let me pick up on that, because in a sense, original sin and the term, which you put in quotation marks, fall of man, is definitely not part of the Jewish view of Genesis chapters 2 and 3. But if I were to read the following verse to many of my Jewish friends and ask them to identify it, I would probably trick them. That is Psalm 51, verse 5. In the Hebrew version, it's Psalm 51, verse 7. Indeed, I was born guilty, a sinner, when my mother conceived me. Now, please note, that is original sin. That person is saying, and this is not a mistranslation, I was born with sin. So in some sense, the notion of original sin is very much part of the Hebrew Bible. But if you were to press me, I would not be able to find many other verses which agree with that verse from Psalm 51. It is a minority opinion within the Hebrew Bible, or expressed only very rarely within the Hebrew Bible. You have some similar notions. For example, when God is about to destroy people with the flood of Noah, God says that people's evil inclinations are bad all the time and so forth. So you have a handful, maybe 2 hands full of texts that express that. But this is a wonderful case, and we show a lot of other cases like this in the Bible with and without Jesus, where a notion that is a peripheral notion within the Hebrew Bible, for whatever sets of reasons, is picked up in the early Christian community, sometimes in the New Testament, or sometimes, as AJ just noted, in the New Testament, or a little bit later in the early church fathers, and becomes magnified and magnified. So another way of putting this idea is that, yeah, in some way, Jews and Christians really do share the notion of original sin, but in the Hebrew Bible, it is a minority notion. It is not part of the Eden narrative, while in the Christian tradition, it eventually becomes a majority notion and becomes very, very central to Christian faith and belief in a way in which it does not in Judaism. There's material shared and places where we differ.
Hey, thank you so much for checking out this video clip from the Dogado podcast. To get more videos like this, simply subscribe here on YouTube. You can also download the full episode of each show on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or your favorite podcast player. Take care.